Hello and welcome to Sunday the 16th of March with myself, Sebastian, and Dan. Dan is currently in Maui.
I certainly am.
Yeah.
And loving it. And
Yeah.
I just parked it outside on the patio today so you can see a bit of Maui behind. And
those trees behind you are beautiful. The colors popping.
Aren't they?
Yeah.
That's why I moved out here. I'm not in very good review, but that doesn't matter. You don't need to see me very much. So how have you been, Seb? I haven't talked to you for a little while.
Yeah, I know.
So you were talking about some changes going on in your life and how that's making you think about things.
Yeah, well, I definitely I've been through some periods, long periods of my life where I felt a lot of stagnation. Things just weren't really moving. I wasn't particularly happy about that, but I kind of felt stuck. And I guess for me to stay in that state, I felt safe in it. And it did lead to, movement happening and changes happening. But more recently, I've definitely had like a lot of things kind of changing. And it feels like everything is kind of shifting, which is good. It's a little unnerving at times, but I'm happy to see the changes happening. But yeah, it definitely can be a little unnerving.
Well, I was going to make a point here. Everything is subject to reviewing it from the perspective of what we are about, which is the incorporation of love into your life. And when that becomes a desire to us, we get into trouble. And we didn't expect to get into trouble because we thought, oh, well, when we turn our attention toward spiritual source, that's going to be great because then spiritual source will start to flow in. But that's only half. If you see the camera jiggling and things, that's Sam helping me out by banging around, trying to lick my hands, bang the table, and eat my hat, as he successfully did. So the thing I'm making the point to people who are doing this is the next necessary step for humanity, to shift your attention out of ambition, which is your personal desire for your personal life at moment to moment, which occupies all of our attention up until the point where we realize that there is another source of purpose other than pleasing our ego or doing what our ambition directs us towards.
Yeah.
And that's harmonizing it with spiritual input. When you harmonize anything with spiritual input, you're harmonizing it with love.
Yeah.
And that immediately causes us to stop dead in our tracks and panic, because now we know it's real. Now we know that there is a purpose to the universe. There's a purpose to God, if you want to put it in a personal form, and there's a purpose to your own spiritual soul nature, your own spiritual spirit. All of a sudden, it's like we're overwhelmed with the idea that all of these purposes are going on, and we're busy, stroking our own strop. So, what do we do about that? Well, it gets, I don't know. Do you hear what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Because yeah, you realize there's something so much more important than what it was you were previously focused on, which is both wonderful and amazing. You're like, you've just opened yourself up to that. And then at the same moment, you're like, okay, well, now what do I do?
Right.
And I think the only thing that came to me that has started to make things move is just it no longer was acceptable for me to just do nothing. And this urge to create with that, to have, to be somewhat awakened to that and desire to put that out into the world, it was no longer acceptable for me to do nothing. So I was like, I just have to create. And there's parts of me that are blocked, and I have to just push through with this creative energy that's going to allow this flow to happen. And it's change has definitely been happening in weird and wonderful ways. But yeah,
Okay, let me look at something with you.
yeah,
And there we have a lot of models for this. Sam, I don't need you to lick my hands. They're doing just fine. They're clean enough. So just go lay down somewhere. He hears a voice talking about things like this, and he gets to want to be involved.
mm.
Just so you know what we're dealing with. Can you see Sam?
Yes, we can see Sam.
Look at the camera, Sam. Right. So, so the thing is, when we look at the models for this, now I am probably causing more problem in your life than good in many ways, because I'm working at the Love Foundry. The Love Foundry has a dedicated purpose, which is not particularly working from an outward point of view, because it's hard to get traction on this kind of a purpose in a material world, because the idea is to make that informing source of spiritual value more real in people's lives. So that's a dedicated purpose, and it narrows things down. And I don't want that to be a limitation on anybody's relationship to spirituality,
Mm.
because the models that we look at uh, for this kind of activity in the world seem to be dedicated models. Like you look at the Buddha, who spent from the time he was enlightened under the Bodhi tree and became a master, more than a master, a bodhisattva of wisdom. He taught to his disciples for 40 years, which is an amazing gift to humanity.
Mm.
And when we look at the Christ, he starts on a pilgrimage of spiritual birth in human nature by taking love itself into his own nature, and then dedicating himself and his apostles and disciples to expressing the fact that that lives within us and is accessible to us. And we are, in fact, ourselves the light of the world. Now, that seems a little bizarre when you look at the way humans express themselves, because we're going about that personal ambition activity.
Mm.
But that doesn't change the fact. The fact is that in him and in others like him, that light has been brought to kindling, and then brought to flaming, and then brought to expression. So we see these models and we think, oh, now I'm going to download my spiritual reality into me, and I'm going to have to change everything about my life and go do something else. And do you see what I'm saying? Do you see how
Yes,
that
yeah.
could appear to us that way? And I thought that myself at points of my life where I'm struggling to do the same thing we all are doing, which is to be in harmony with and at one with the spiritual reality that is pouring down to and through the earth without anybody noticing it. So, and because I've always sort of been about a purpose of one kind or another, I was in the music world trying to work spirituality through that, like a lot of hippies were back in the day, and other projects and things I've done with different meditation groups, with hierarchy itself, with different things. But I've come to the realization that there's 8 billion people on the planet. We can't all grab a begging bowl and rush out into the square and start talking about the Yoga Sutras.
Yeah.
And we also cannot suddenly, each of us, leap to our feet and head out for Samaria or somewhere to bring the good news to the world. The world needs to keep turning.
Yeah.
It needs to keep feeding itself. It needs to keep serving the purposes of living, which is not at opposition to spiritual input. And once we come to this awareness and realize spiritual input is a beautiful and wonderful thing, but so is that which develops you personally through labor and through experience and through harmony with others doing things. I have learned an immense amount of human nature and spiritual nature by doing jobs, just jobs out there in the world. I've done 100 different jobs, more, and every one of them taught me something that I didn't know before I did it. And you look back at the experiences of it and realize that if you want to have harmony with spiritual inflow, let the work you do awaken you into it, not just into being better at doing your job, whether it's sweeping the floors or filling orders for Amazon or making lattes, whatever the job is you're doing. And this is also true of corporate lawyers and scientists and others. Whatever the job is you're doing in the world, that can become a pathway for powerful spiritual input and awakening without interfering with it.
Yeah.
Now, does that make sense in some
Yeah,
form?
absolutely.
All right. And not only not interfering with your personal ambition, but enhancing it enormously, making you tremendously successful at it, making you the best baker in town, making you the best cab driver in the city, making you whatever it is you're doing, if you're in harmony with spiritual reality, the best at it. Now, obviously, the Christ was the best at what he was doing in the world while he was doing it, as probably were his disciples, with maybe exceptions, I don't know, as well as the Buddha. And some of the followers of the Buddha have been the most outstanding human beings that ever walked the earth. So we look at these things and we realize it's not necessary to separate what you do in the world from identifying yourself with the spiritual source of the world. In fact, that is our responsibility.
Yeah.
So that opens us up. And if we reset our sense of wholeness to not offend the personal need to grow through experience, because we all have to do that. We all have to grow up. I have a lot left growing up to do, although I have a lot more time maybe to do it in this particular life, but we have a lot of growing up to do. The human race has immense amount of time to grow up. And when we do, we will become all those miraculous things spoken about humanity by great prophets and seers of the past. The destiny of humanity is really not comprehensible by humans at this stage of our awakening because it's so fantastic, it's so miraculous. And so from our point of view, we need to eliminate any of this resistance, because the moment that, and I've seen this in myself and I've seen it in others, the moment we become conscious that there is right action, spiritually speaking, that there is a source of spiritual will, spiritual intelligence, and spiritual love, we don't want to make any more mistakes, because we look back at our path and go, whoa, that could not possibly have been in harmony with spiritual love. And so we get paralyzed. Yeah, paralyzed.
Yeah.
You've been in that paralysis.
Oh, I've
And then
been.
we think, okay, I'm not going to let myself be paralyzed anymore. I'm going to go out there and just crash through the brush until I finally get somewhere. And if your intention is to clarify that paralysis into spiritual motion,
Yeah.
then that's what will happen. You will break through into bringing that intelligent guidance into your life. And here's the thing to think about, not just look at it and review it and see what you think. Interpreting the light and the purpose of spiritual existence as it strives to be realized in a human being does not mean taking orders like a McDonald's. We're not here to look up into the spiritual heavens and go, so what is it you want? Two burgers and a Coke? And then set about the business of producing 2 burgers and a Coke. That's not what spiritual life wants, if it wants anything. It's not what's needed. What's needed is for us to be able to receive direct inflow from the dimensions of spiritual being that lie within us, interpret them, and apply them to the material world in which we find ourselves.
Yeah.
This takes out the middleman, the priest. This takes out the one who stands between us and the divine and says, I'll tell you what to do. That's never really worked out all that well, although there were times in history when that was the only option. When you had to go to the priesthood, and I think there were times when that was the logical place to go, because the priesthood was filled with honorable people who listened carefully, looked deeply, and spoke the wisdom they could for their people. And now nobody seems to be able to hear anything except crap on the 6 o'clock news. So we have to do our own interpreting. It's time for humanity to recognize that it is within us to open up a sense of contact with that source that we are already lodged in. In our inner nature, the soul nature, the spirit of our nature is already anchored, irreversibly anchored in spiritual content and interpreting it in some form or another and expressing it toward our human nature. So if that's the case, and I think it probably is, if you look at these trees behind me, you'll see that they are expressing to their material nature whatever's in their source. They've long since passed the point of the seed sprouting, and they're now well into their maturing, and still it seems to be unfolding and expressing through them with fruit and flowers and relationships to other things, birds, animals, insects, trees, everything. And humanity is no different. So we're equipped for it. Internally, you're obviously equipped to receive, comprehend, and express the wholeness of your nature, not just Seb's physical expression through the animal nature or mine, but the actual source of that, the actual deeper living part of you. Now, I don't know, you may not see it that way. You may not see yourself as a complex being with soul and spirit and those qualities meshed together with your human personality of brain and feelings and physical. But I think that life is that complex.
No, I do too. I mean, I think sometimes it can be hard to try and comprehend all that while you're trying to be in the world. And I think sometimes it's easier to know and accept it's there, and you choose for it to come through, and then just kind of focus a little bit smaller on like being, in the world and knowing that the intention is there to come through. Because I go a little cross-eyed if I try and think about all of it too much. But I know that that is true.
Well, yeah, I think you do know it. And knowing is different from believing. If you believe that it's true, you are working through your emotional body and the ideal of belief. If you know it's true, there's a kind of certainty as a bedrock in you
Yeah.
that says this is true. Now, I don't know how to do it well. I don't know how to interpret it well. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but that's on me. And if I can work that out, if I can figure that out, if I can get that in harmony with, then it's going to flow. And I
Yeah.
think that's where a lot of people are. And so they turn their attention towards it and they seek it. And they seek it in all the ways that humans have always sought it. We look for mentors, we look for inscriptions on old clay tablets, we look for everything we can think of that might give us some sense of direction. Now, sometimes we overemphasize mentors or religions or cryptic things like the Emerald Tablet. And so what do we do about all of that? How do we bring it around and get ourselves sort of dialed in to the spiritual moment? We're in an incredible spiritual moment for the earth. And it doesn't always look like it because of all the chaos that's going on. And it looks like, Trump is stirring up or Putin or somebody out there is making all of this dust and misery. But those are the times when things change. Those are the times when people make great shifts
Yeah.
of consciousness. So let's find out. The people who are stamping around on the world stage aren't necessarily going to bring through the revelation of the moment, but somebody will. It always comes from a source. And we have a history of sources. And the old history of our sources are myths. Go all the way back to Hercules or the oracles of Delphi. And those are just the oracles are relatively recent, back to the Greeks, early Greeks. And Hercules goes back further than that by some dimension. And so we see myths of these things, but our recent times don't show us very clear portals into this dimension that we're talking about. But that doesn't mean they're not there and that we're not using them. We are using them. A lot of humanity really has a strong inner sense of wanting to blend their deeper love nature. Now, I focus on love because that's the one element of the three elements: will, love, and intelligence, of the fundamental trinity that we've divided life into. Life has way more elements and aspects, attributes, than we have probably thought of ever. We don't know how to think about them because they have not been introduced to us by life itself, which does have, I think, a process. It's going about introducing things to itself as a physical universe that it can manage, and synthesizing those into themselves so that we can take the next step toward a greater expansion is part of the process. It's part of the way you would teach a child. So why would it be different with life? Because in life, we are the children. You don't try to teach a child advanced calculus before it learns how to do 1 and 1 is 2. And so will and intelligence and love come out of the fountainhead of life. And when we got those synthesized in ourselves and mastered, then I think it's time for the next great lesson.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know if you think what that next great lesson would be, but if you had fully synthesized in yourself intelligence and love, which is love wisdom, the Buddha and the Christ sort of thing, fused together into one expression of love and wisdom, then what would be life's next great offering to you, do you think? I don't mean to pin you down with an esoteric question, but it's good to look ahead. It's good to plan ahead and say what might be coming up.
Well, I'm gonna cheat because we've we've talked about this before, so I'm going to use your answer, but your answer makes sense, which is freedom.
Okay, well, that doesn't make it correct, by the way, because it's mine.
No, but it's it has more sense to it than probably what I would come up with.
Other than a perfect gumball or something, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I get what I would agree with you on freedom, but I don't
Because-
like just saying something. I like looking at something and seeing why might that be true? What
well,
is it about freedom?
I think it makes sense for what you spoke about previously about how when you become aware of certain things that it's not about, just taking orders. The spiritual life isn't asking that of you, or life itself isn't asking that of you, if it's asking anything at all. I think it wants a co-creator in or with love, so if life is, if we have free will and we're in love, working with love and co-creating with that, then it makes sense to me that freedom freedom within that makes sense, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
Well, I think it does, but you have to, it's only makes sense, Seb, if we look at why it makes sense. In other words, saying something doesn't cause it to make sense. Only the integration of that in ourselves with a deeper synthesis of what we have learned from living in nature, then it can make sense.
Hmm.
It can make sense that we can give freedom to a child to go beyond the fence at the front of the house only when that child has developed a certain amount of capacity to understand and integrate itself in the outer world, to know
Yeah.
the dangers, to know how to address and support itself in the interaction. Now, lately, I think when I say lately, I mean the last couple of thousand years, there is a sense of citizenship. And by the way, it was the Romans, and everybody's like, everybody makes a joke out of the Romans, like Monty Python's, Romans, a lovely lot, because they were pretty tough on people and tough on themselves, but they brought citizenship to the world, literally. If you were a citizen of Rome, you had rights, and those rights were upheld by the military. We didn't really worry too much about policemen. We we just ran it from one sort of central authority, going back to the Caesar of the day. But the point was, you were a Roman citizen. And when they conquered your country, and they did, then you became Roman citizens. They didn't really, they might have judged you personally and thought that you were an inferior piece of crap compared to their nobility of being Roman, but that's just human stuff. The government itself gave you Roman citizenship. Now, they didn't really care what you worshiped. They didn't really care what your mores were, how you went about things. If that was the way your country did things before the Romans showed up, they'd let you go about the business of continuing to do that in many ways, not always, and certainly not perfectly. But you gained Roman citizenship, and you obeyed the citizenship rules of Rome, which meant, of course, obeying the army and their edicts. And of course, pay their taxes, which probably was what brought the house down, like it does everywhere else when they overtax, because they're wasting our money, which is a part of what's going on now in the United States. Are we going to overtax ourselves into oblivion with $30 trillion worth of debt? Nobody even knows what $1 trillion is. Or are we going to come under some kind of management? Well, these are the lessons, I think, of walking around out there in the world. But we have to recognize that there's a balance between serving our inner source and the outer world.
Hmm.
Now, freedom and free will are inseparable, and free will and love are inseparable. Without free will, you cannot act on love as a concept. You might have it, it might be granted to you. You might be living in harmony with nature out by yourself somewhere next to a waterfall with your cabin and playing with the birds and the bees like Cinderella or something. But if we're going to act as a group in harmony with each other and with nature and with the universe of livingness, then we need to incorporate free will and love, because without love, the harmony falls apart. And we are not any longer obeying an inner sense of heart flowing out, embracing the unity of all things, which is what love offers us, one of the things it offers us. But we're just obeying rules that we think will allow us to live together. Which is what the Greeks contributed. Citizenship with ethics. The Romans brought you citizenship, the Greeks brought you citizenship with ethics. And Confucius did the same thing for China. These things are not brought to us accidentally by bees in the night. They're brought to us by people who work it out.
Mm.
If you go look at Confucius, you see what he was saying. What would the honorable man do? In any circumstance, what would the honorable man do? Inviting people to look within themselves and find what that honorable expression is. That's an enormous spiritual approach to life, because it draws no attention to the teacher as an authority, but does require of the individual that they seek that authority within themselves, which is where all great teachers lead us, into ourselves, starting with the Christ and with the Buddha and all the rest. So freedom is necessary for love. Without it, in a society, as we see in China today, the freedom has been taken away. Well, it hasn't really been taken away. It's been given up by the people. Now, it's hard to hang on to it when the military supports the authority to take it away from you, like it does with the Uyghurs or does with someone else, based on the idea that your idea of freedom is going to create disharmony with the greater whole, so we have to take it away from you. Which is a totalitarian approach, which seems logical if you're dealing with people who have rudimentary hatred in their heart towards others, which I can't say the Uyghurs do, even though they're a Muslim group. There are people in the world that are other Muslim groups who think that way and feel that way towards different groups, as we see. But that doesn't mean the Uyghurs do. They're Chinese after all. So the idea that they should be restricted in their freedom because of the harm they're going to do to others kind of falls apart if you look at evidence. But the idea that it might harm a totalitarian government taking away freedom because they want the freedom to worship the way they want to worship, that could have some threat to a government.
Yeah.
So the government, to protect itself, it thinks it has the right to govern because the people allowed them to, gave it to them, which they're now, by the way, in China, in the process, the slow, terrible process of withdrawing that support for their government. The wind of heaven is blowing in another direction. And the people are realizing that their government, because they don't know what government is for the most part. Some of the intellectuals in it have some idea what government looks like, but do they really understand what it's like to be an American or to be in a free country or to think about a democracy where the people govern themselves? I doubt it. Intellectually, they could have some idea about that. but they haven't had 1 million of their people die in the fight for it.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you begin to have an understanding of what its worth is to you, which is why America is such a terrifying country to totalitarian countries, because that disease of freedom, the realization that the freedom, that true freedom in you gives you the power to love whatever you want, the way you want to, is terrifying to certain governments, to certain people's way of ruling people. Doesn't make it perfect, won't be perfect for probably 1 million years, but it will certainly become the choice of the day when we realize that love and freedom go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And if you give freedom to people who love, who truly understand the nature of the energy of love and awaken it in themselves, then you have nothing ever to fear from them, because love doesn't harm. It has an inability to harm. It simply can't do it. It's because it would be harming itself in the inclusiveness of the unity that love realizes. So all of this comes around to the moment we're in right now and how to comprehend all of this. The intellect simply is not equipped through education, unless you're really a deeply devoted Buddhist or a truly spiritualized Christian. You probably won't understand how these values actually work, because love and wisdom are real in nature. And when they're real in us, they manifest the principles, powers, and potentials of themselves. And because that's not manifesting, we don't give the respect to love and wisdom that we should.
Mm.
Now, I want to finish this circular sort of conversation about it, because this is not teaching the people out there in our podcast world, it's not teaching them how to import love into themselves and manifest it, but it's laying the foundation for it.
Yeah.
So what would you think you would gain that you don't already have in your toolkit of able, usable tools? Like, if I give you a screwdriver, it doesn't mean anything to you till you see a screw. And as they say sometimes, to a guy with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But when we get love as a tool that we comprehend and understand, what would your life begin to employ as a constant state of activity if you had it, do you think? Do you hear the people next door? I
No,
could
no,
move them.
no. I can hear like a
Okay.
little bit of background noise, but I
All
couldn't
right.
even tell there were people.
It's nice outside, so I don't want to try to move it in. But
Yeah.
and that, damn it, they have the right to be outside too.
Yeah,
Nothing you can do. That's why these totalitarian governments look so good, because you can just wave your hand and they disappear,
yeah.
and you have it all peaceful to yourself. Go ahead. I asked a question and I didn't give you a chance to answer.
Yeah, I mean that's it's a tough question, because
Well, maybe I phrased it wrong. I'm not trying to interrupt your train of thought, but I'm looking at the way I phrased the question, and I kind of it's a fork in the road, and if I direct you down the wrong fork of the road, then we don't find the answer. And at the fork of the road, I said, "What do you think you would gain if you had the tool of love and you were applying it in your life?" And that implies that you can tell love what to do. I should probably have phrased it in a different way, that said, if you were in harmony with the energy and power of love that comes out of life to us as an available energy to express through ourselves, but not necessarily to dominate. I don't think you can tell love what to do. I don't
yeah,
think anyone can. I think we can bring it into ourselves and let it be love in us, and then we can experience the process of what that brings about in our life and manage those prospects, but not tell love what to do any more than we can tell light when we turn on the light, just shine in that one corner.
Yeah.
You can put a flashlight in your hand and you can shine that in one corner, but you're shining all of the light no matter what. And if you just fire up the light, it's going to shine into the darkness. And I think love has the same independence of expression always, but its independence of expression is profoundly wholesome to life. So maybe that's a better way, but it comes back to the same question. What would begin to emerge? I mean, I have an idea when I look at my nuclear family, like they used to think of in the 50s.
Yeah.
You got electricity, you got a microwave, you got yourself a stove, you got a toaster, you got a washing machine. This is the nuclear family employing the nuclear age, and now you're going to have electricity for free. And what's your life going to suddenly be filled with? It's like that, only real, because love is a living, consistent energy of creative being. And I think the only one in the universe, by the way. We can think we create something because we paint the house, but in fact, we just change the appearance of the house. We didn't actually change the chemistry. We just applied some chemistry over the surface. So a lot of times we think we're creating something when in fact we're really just rearranging energies to suit our expression. But setting that aside, what do you think about it? I mean, I'm interested in your point of view because I think that's the human point of view.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I get a question like that, my brain automatically wants to try and visualize what that would look like. And I don't have an idea of how that would visually look like. I do know that if my expression is allowing for that flow of love to join me in all, aspects of my life, I know it's going to rapidly change my life, other people's lives. I know it's going to be incredibly dynamic and just constantly evolving and evoking change. And that flow that I kind of talked about of like creativity that I've started to open up, I think if you're living from that place, I think creation is just a part of life, just happening in and around you all times. And I think you're evoking that change in other people as well. And I think it's something that just spreads little by little, because I think well, maybe not little by little, but I think it is changing the environment around you, where I think normal sort of human life, we're sort of, as you kind of said, you're changing the decoration on the outside of your life, but it's not really changing. But I think when love comes in, it's actually changing the environment, not just how it visually looks.
Yeah, that's a terrific point of view. All right, let's pause there for a second, because that's a big ask of love, to actually transform, to transmute, to translate, to transition. I think that's the reason I believe, and this is my own, when I say believe, it's because it has to reveal itself to all of us as a fact before we can trust it as knowing. But the reason that these words have come into the human language in the last, I would say, since the 60s, that are what I call the trance words: transformation, transmutation. These words were in the dictionary, some of them, not all of them. Before then, like, transistor was not in the dictionary. It was in the dictionary since the 50s, but that was the last century. like transistor and a lot of other words, they came out of the exploration into electricity, but they have the same power and meaning. Well, the transistor is probably the most powerful invention ever. I don't know. But translate, transform, transmute, transition, all of these words, then they line up behind you because there's,
Did we say transmutation?
yes, transmutation especially. And, there's a definition to those words, but it doesn't express itself in livingness. They express, if you look at the dictionary, if there even is a dictionary anymore, that isn't, it's all fallen apart because Webster, who was dedicated to language and to the expression of energy through symbols in letters and words as language, and what that implies, you see, that's an incredible science, creating a dictionary. But we don't think about any of that. We just use words because we've become so materialistic. We've lost the meaning behind the word and as a living thing. And we've completely lost the significance behind the meaning, which is the spirit of the word. So the bringing of spirit down into meaning, which is the level of the soul, and then out into the world as a idol, as an expressing form, as a symbol in a word like love, has, except for a small group of people relative to the bulk of us all, has been lost to thinking. And that's the educational system falling apart. We're more concerned with labeling things, and forcing outcomes on things as if the material world were the source of creation than we are with the deeper meanings of these things.
Yeah.
But that will return as love begins to demonstrate itself as a fact of nature, not an emotion, but an energetic, creative root energy of nature. So, yes, change is definitely possible when love enters the room. Now, we found that out the first time we fell in love with somebody, anybody, anything. Fall in love with your puppy till he eats your hat. And then, I mean, whatever happens to us when we fall in love, quote unquote, fall in love, it's a change, it's a transformation. I'm not saying it's a transmutation, although if you took the chemistry of your saliva when you really saw that other one and said, oh my God, I didn't even know they build them like that. And everything inside you went into this cosmic change and you fell in love. And everything took over your consciousness and you were obsessed with that thing, that one, that individual. And it has to be them. You have to have them in your life. You have to have that one in your life. Now, I know that terrible sensation and that horrifying dominance that it pulls over you and how wonderful all that can be till she kisses you off or he dumps you or whatever happens. So that's something we've learned about love. And it isn't something we invented. It's not something humanity decided to do or had any sense of control over. And it's not even something that was subscribed to as a desirable end until recently. That's why in the Indian culture and other cultures, marriages were arranged and decided because mature people were better judges than idiot children at deciding who should get together, live together for years and breed and have children and produce strengths and alignments that made sense to the adults of the room. So that's how we dealt with all that relationship stuff until finally somebody like Romeo and Juliet said, I don't want that. I want him. I want her. I want us. And that's the way it's going to be. And so that struggled to fight its way to the surface. Even in Italy, the Capulets and who were the other guys? Can't remember the other side of the family in the Romeo and Juliet story, which shows you how bad my upbringing was. But I'm
Well, mine
American
too.
after all. You're
I've got
British.
no excuse. Yeah.
You don't know either. Oh my God.
No, I'm blanking too.
Yeah. Well, Stratford-on-Avon. You should just beat your way back there and learn some lessons. So, yeah. Even, but I'm just pointing out that as recent as English history, of course, and Italian history and French history and these things that are we consider relatively modern times, love was still not recognized as something to allow to be in charge. It's all good and well, but we can't let it be in charge. And that's why I'm asking you what changes you thought would emerge in your life if you let it be in charge. If you said, hey, you know what, I'm going to let this have equal power in my life, which is what the idea of a relationship, a nuclear family, should be. Equal power between the masculine and the feminine is the only way that life could possibly want an arrangement to be, but not in a materialistic perspective, but in the perspective of love. There is no question that equality is the law in love. Well, there is a question, of course. You can make up any question you want. But from my point of view, those who have mastered love, and there are some around who demonstrate that, always equate the masculine and feminine and all of the opposites equally. Because love, as an expression of energy, is a fusion of all the opposites. Do you see how that's possible? Well, is that
Yeah.
agreement? I don't see how it's possible with everything, but I do agree that it is true.
Yes.
I just I just think the more we learn about fusing opposites of any kind, if there is such a thing as an opposite, but if you split something into two parts, then you could have an opposite. And if you put the two parts together, you can have a whole of what those two opposites are. If you split 8 in half, you get 4 and 4. Neither of them can be 8. But if you put them together, you have 8. It expands the 4 into something much greater. And opposites have this way of unifying. And when they unify, they don't present a more perfect version of one or the other. They present a perfect version of something different than either one. Now, that's not obvious to everybody yet. As you can see in the relationship between conservatives and liberals in the politics, they don't actually look for what will be born that is completely different from either one of them, but more whole and more perfect in love. But they will, because there's no choice. The only way you can create an opposite is to separate something whole in love into two parts. And the only way you can restore it is to put it back together. And our experience in the opposites brings us eventually to the place where the Buddha arrives of realizing that wisdom is the unification of all of those opposites in ourselves, which takes us into the territory of love and gives us the properties of love that we lose the moment we separate something into opposites. We lose the inherent power and properties of love that not all of them, but the ones that are lost by that separation. So how will we know what they are? Put it back together again. Unify the masculine and the feminine, truly unify it in ourselves, and you're going to end up with a perfect whole sexual being, aren't you? And this confusion in the world of sexuality right now can resolve itself if we stop and take a look at this possibility. If you see something way over here in the feminine and something way over here on the masculine, the brute, and over here the helpless artistic expression of femininity, neither one of those are going to accomplish what a unified version of them is. But to bring that unified version about in your own consciousness, in your own life, is going to be a gradual, experienced understanding of both of them as you move gradually closer and closer to experiencing yourself as an androgynous being, a being who has a full masculine complement and a full feminine complement. And kind of just now, for me, watching how the world relates to itself, I love a feminine woman. I love a masculine man. I like the idea of those, but I'm not against an androgynous person who has these wonderful qualities in themselves. I see that as a definite direction of maturity through experience as either one of those over time. And I can certainly imagine that if you experienced yourself in 10,000 incarnations as a woman and 10,000 incarnations as a man, because those are really the only two incarnations you get offered, except something that's scrambled up in the middle. If you experience 10,000 of each of those, you're going to be better at being either one. And then if you're born into the world in a feminine body or in a masculine body, you're going to find yourself still balanced. Now, that's assuming that reincarnation works or whatever it is. But how would you view that in yourself, Seb? Would you think that would be true or not true or crazy idea or what?
No, absolutely. I kind of think for me, both the masculine and the feminine, it is kind of both strong. They both play big roles in my life, and I can both be around. I am masculine. Obviously, I'm born into a man's body, and I understand those aspects, but I also really understand the feminine aspect, and I'm very comfortable being around women, you know, in a sort of more feminine way. But both of those live quite strongly in me, I feel. And I think there's been times when I've been more drawn to one side than the other side, within myself. But uh, I think I have a good understanding of both, and I'm sure that's from multiple lifetimes.
Well, I'm not certain it's from multiple lifetimes, but I would expect that that's what would occur through multiple lifetimes. And I guess I would have to say, yeah, I agree with you there. I think this is a slow process. And it isn't just looking at the femininity inside of yourself or the masculinity if you're a woman and thinking, gee, I really am a little tough, you know?
Mm.
Well, I have a problem, and I'm not against whatever anyone thinks about or believes about themselves or thinks is ideal for them. It's just that I think the idea of rejoicing in what's in us,
Yeah.
if I had more desire to be feminine than I do, then I think I should employ learning more about it. I think I should employ more creative sensitivity. And then that would help balance that side of my desire for that. And if I desired more masculinity in a feminine form, then I would go get it. You know, I would go out and practice being a cowboy, but be a cowgirl. And I've grown up in the logging camps, and I've been out in the West in Arizona and places. And every time you see someone who's freely and openly expressing themselves that way, either direction, they are really beautiful. It's
Mm.
beautiful to watch. It's beautiful to interact with and enjoy. It may not be what we personally want, but we look at it the wrong way when we identify with a sex more than we identify with the wholeness of being both sexes internally and externally. And I think that that will come about over time because, to use a phrase that sounds a little esoteric, but it's not, the apotheosis being the highest point of development, the apotheosis of strength is gentleness. And that expresses this concept without attaching it to a sex, but a union. What is the value of having great strength if it doesn't understand that being gentle with it is its greatest asset?
Mhm.
And we recognize this in people. Remember Andre, the gentle giant? He was a guy who was a wrestler, but he was so big that, you know, if he's going to go into your house, he's got to be careful where he sits because he'll crush your furniture.
Yeah.
And so that's true. And elephants, who you would think would just destroy everything around them, are. What's the matter there? You having a dream over there? Sam's now into the dreaming state, dreaming about chewing up my hat. But anyway, so elephants are incredibly delicate and sensitive, and we've even seen elephants take a paintbrush and paint a painting with it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just astounding. So aside from all of this, we're looking at, to go back to the question we diverted from, which is how do you think it would express itself through you if that union were accomplished in you, if you opened that door and did not resist the masculine side of love or the feminine side of love and let them fuse in you and course through you as a natural expression of the wholeness of life unified, what kind of powers would emerge? That is a fantastic thing to imagine.
Mm.
And I think writers and artists and musicians have been working on understanding and expressing that artistically in themselves for all time, all the way back to the Iliad or Homer or any of these great legends and stories that come from the past down to modern film and modern artistic expression. So, and I think it will be absolutely true of what's coming up in humanity next, which are those with the courage to do what we're talking about, the courage to just unify in themselves and then express through that what they are motivated to do, not in some abstract way, but in a human way. Which brings us back to the very beginning of this conversation, probably where we should cut it off, which was the blending of ambition, which is the human desire to express an individualized purpose, and the unification of love in us, inclusive in that expression. And how is that look in the world if it's accomplished? And it isn't just serving love as the Christ did, or maybe the Buddha did. I'm not exactly sure. The Buddha was serving wisdom. But that's coming up. It's here. It's not just coming up, it's here. Because either of these opposite expressions are not enough, and we all know it. It's not enough to be a Democrat. It's not enough to be a conservative Republican. We need to unify the two in ourselves and step forward and demonstrate that wholeness.
Hmm.
Not as either one, as the wholeness itself, inclusive of love. I think. Now that's that. If I were going to start a political party, and I think some are fumbling around trying to do that, but it's so easy to get pulled into one side of the opposites or the other that they end up being labeled and driven out of the space, like Marianne Williams was, when you step forward and try and focus on it and determine it. Because of those very properties that are in love that people do not recognize, how transformation and transmutation and the nature of grace itself which is the expression of love through the emotional body, not as an emotion, but as grace. It's a different gift. And the unity that love is itself by nature that makes us realize as we express love that we are unified with all other things. I started to say living things, but there are no dead things. There's only living things.
Yeah.
Every atom of life is alive, and every atom of life has the same fire in it that we do. It doesn't have self-conscious awareness, so that's not there as the light of the world, as the Christ would express it. Why is it the light of the world? Because you can express love. You have the power to make that decision, to act on that decision. Even if you're a sculptor, maybe you're Michelangelo, maybe you're Da Vinci, maybe you want to create properties, houses, maybe you want to create pottery, maybe you want to create something else. But there's nothing stopping you from incorporating love in your creation. That's the point of our conversation today. Now, what don't you agree with about any of all of that? Because I don't necessarily state things accurately or even correctly at any level. So what?
No, there's none of that I disagree with.
Well, at least we're in agreement on the issues.
Yeah.
Now we just
It
have to
doesn't make
figure
us
out.
right, but yeah, we're
No,
in
it doesn't make
agreement.
us right, and it doesn't give us the power to do it.
Yes.
That we have to earn. We have to earn the power to do it, and by doing it, demonstrate its rightness. And I don't think its rightness can even be defined by us after having demonstrated it. Michelangelo, when he finished the Piatra, which is this gigantic freaking statue of Mary holding the Christ, the crucified Christ in her arms. I mean, that's a pretty big undertaking to start with just a block of marble. But when he finished that, he was done. But now, what do the rest of us think about it? That's what turns it into great art. In the comprehension of the world, looking at it, we think, damn, that's good. And in his point of view, the first time when he created that piece of art, he revealed it, and he was a young man, and no one had ever done anything like that. And so they were having this cocktail party while they were releasing the viewing of this piece of art, and everybody was questioning who did it, because I guess he did it off somewhere where he didn't have anybody watching him, which I don't blame him for. I wouldn't want to be chiseling away on having people standing around saying, "Oh, you should go a little to the left." So maybe he did it in secret, but wherever he was at this level of the people who were at the cocktail party, which is not the workmen, they were trying to decide who had done this. And they were naming, Bolichetti or this guy or that guy or the other guy might have done it, because they were all known artists, sculptors. And it upset him because no one recognized him. So he went and got a chisel and he chiseled his name into it at some corner of it. And then he got so upset with himself for having done that, for that vanity response, that he never signed another piece of his work. I don't think you'll find his name on the Sistine Chapel. But I just make the point that it's letting it loose into the world and let the world decide if that's love, if it's not love. And then when we all come to agreement on it, we will all have grown up in it. So I think we're on our way to that, and I think we're in a moment of great understanding. Oh, the crickets went off. Did you hear the crickets?
I heard the crickets.
Yeah, that's Taylor wanting to know if we're still on a podcast. So she finally got herself off the ski slopes. You want to do it over or just finish this one up?
Well, we should wrap this one up. But thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll speak to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Seb.
wanna know.